So today is Christ the King Sunday, this final Sunday before Advent. It's actually in the church calendar. The new church year starts next Sunday. So this is the final Sunday of the church calendar year. And it gives us this opportunity before we start singing O Come, Emmanuel next week. We will pause and remember who truly reigns. As we've already acknowledged today, that Jesus is our King. This idea of king is not something that feels terribly comfortable for some of us in Australia, even though technically we still have a king as the head of state. It's not something that we incorporate much in our everyday lives. Even so, the word king, whilst can feel distant to us, is something that the Bible uses a lot in the way it describes God, or particularly Jesus. It is something which is helpful in our understanding of the character of Jesus and how we are called to respond. So the imagery invites us to consider things like who really rules in our life, or who do we trust when things get hot? And that brings us to this story of Daniel chapter 3, a story of a very different type of king. So, King Nebuchadnezzar loved power, loved adulation. And so he built a golden statue, as we said, 27.4 metres tall, or 17.5 meters high, and ordered everyone to bow down to it. There is some debate whether the statue was of himself or of an idol. We get confused because there's another part of Daniel where there is a vision of a statue of Nebuchadnezzar with clay feet. And then this statue just says he built a statue. So we're not quite sure whether it was him, but we like to think that it's a statue of him because it sort of plays into the sort of person that Nebuchadnezzar thinks it is. So he builds this statue, and out comes his authoritarianism nature. With a religious twist. He forces everybody to come and participate in a public worship service before the statue that he has built. It is a strange environment, this thing, because it's almost like a state-sponsored worship service. You know, the ruling body says to everybody, you have to come to this place and you have to worship. You have to worship. Because if you don't, they add an extra incentive in there that you're going to be thrown into the fire. Now, it was interesting, the Message version that we heard earlier sort of cuts out all the repetition lists that I was waiting for. It just says the big band. But if you read the original text or most other translations, it has this long list of instruments that were there. It also has a long list of people who were present there. And it's almost like the writer is trying to play up the absurdity of what is happening here. You know, the comical nature of what is happening here. So he lists off the starets, the prefects, the governors, the treasurers, the judges. Then he lists off all the instruments, the horn, the flute, the lyre, the harp, the pipes. Does this multiple times if you read the whole chapter. It's almost like... this writer is saying, this is crazy what is happening here. Because every time all these instruments plays, all these people bow down and worship, and it happens over and over and over again. And it is weird. It is weird. It's almost like the writer's trying to show it is absurd when power demands worship. It just doesn't work. That's not what worship's about. When you demand worship, it just looks silly like this. And we might smile, but it could be uncomfortably familiar if we start to reflect upon this. Edwina said in her kids' talk, that this desire for building golden statues has not disappeared. It is still in our world as well. In our world, there is demands to bow to the gods of success or image or comfort. We still wrap flags around our faith, and we make wealth and popularity and mistake wealth and popularity for blessing. We may not hear the horn and the flute and the lyre and the pipes or whatever the long list of instruments is anymore, but we know that pressure that the world puts upon us to conform and to do the things that the people in power tell us to do. We know that pressure. To stay quiet and just go along with everybody else. That's all we have to do. As I said, this isn't something from the Nebuchadnezzar worlds. Every age has produced its Nebuchadnezzars, leaders who confuse loyalty with themselves with loyalty to what is right. This is very close to home, isn't it? Like just this week, a world leader insisted that the military should obey their personal commands even if those orders may or may not be illegal. You know, this idea, just do what I say. Just do what I say and you won't get in trouble. It's this exact time of confusion that Daniel chapter 3 is warning us about. How do we work through situations like this? When human power starts demanding absolute allegiance and expects our conscience to bow. Whenever that happens in any nation or party or system, people of faith are called to remember that we have an ultimate alliance. The Super Simon Says person. We have an ultimate alliance, not to the rulers and regimes of this world, but to the God of truth and justice. Nothing stands above that. This reading is interesting on Christ the King Sunday, because it sort of is playing the kingship of Nebuchadnezzar against the kingship of Jesus. Nebuchadnezzar's way is of a coercive kingship, power which is maintained by fear and control. It's about appearance and loyalty and image. And it's in this environment that those three young Jewish exiles, Shadrack, Meshack and Abednego, quietly refuse to bow. These three don't go on with the absurdity of this arrangement, even though it's fake worship and nobody would have cared. You know, it doesn't mean anything. Yet they stood up for what was right. They refused to participate. And when the king hears about it, he is furious, absolutely furious. And he drags them before him and gives them one more chance. Bow down when the music plays, or into the furnace you go. And what God can rescue you from my hand? And this reply, which was just as good in the Message as it is in the NIV, which I'm just about to put up, is amazing. That these three people said, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you on this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. God will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if God does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. There is so much on that screen right now in that statement. So much. So much so, I want you to pause for 60 seconds and reflect upon it. What jumps out for you? Maybe if you're a talking person, this is your opportunity to turn to the person next to you and talk. If you're not, just look like you're reflecting to yourself. It works. Nobody will talk to you. What jumps out for you for this reading? There is a lot in those two verses. What jumps out for you? You've got another 60 seconds. Can I grab this one? Yeah. Then I'm going to ask if anybody wants to say, what is the idea that jumps out to you from that passage? Sorry, I'm actually making you engage with this because I think this is the two key lines of this Bible reading. So does anybody want to share? What jumps out to you from that reading? Yes, the Boltons are in first.
Their willingness to die for their belief.
Yeah.
Their steadfastness in time of peril.
Anyone else?
Making it right no matter the consequences.
Sorry. Yeah, making it right no matter what the cost. Yes. Can I squeeze through here?
They're not certain that God will deliver them, but they still have the faith.
That's really interesting, but there's certainty. Remember that one. I'm going to come back to it. Anyone else want to make any comments? Yeah, don't scratch your head. I just take that as I want to say something. I'm going to give you the two things that jumped out for me from this, and one of them is exactly what Bill just said. There is this sense of certainty here. That part of the line that says God is able to is an extraordinary statement of faith. Our God is able to save us. There's a trust there that in the midst of what's going on here, that we believe in a God who is able. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, they say, God is able to save us. God can do this, they say. God is able to do all things, able to do the miraculous, step into the situation. They're saying we have complete trust that God is able to do this, that God is able to intervene, that God is able to save us. God is able. And yet at the same time, did the other part of that line jump out to you? Even if God does not. Like, those two statements together are extraordinary. So you've got this trust that God is able to do this. But then they're balancing that out with the reality of their experience. Sometimes things don't work out the way that we expect them to. Remember, they're in exile at the moment. Things have not worked out the way they expected it to. They're currently in a different country, being treated almost as slaves in this different country. So they understand the reality of that, but they still believe God is able to do this. But even if God doesn't do it like that, it shouldn't change the way we feel about God. That our trust in God doesn't depend upon how God responds to the situation we find ourselves in. God is able to intervene, but when God doesn't intervene in the way that we were hoping for, it doesn't make any difference. We will still not worship your gods, they say, or bow down to your image of gold. This isn't arrogance or defiance. It's deep trust, the kind of faith that doesn't make a bargain with God. We don't know how this story will end. They don't know how the story will end. They just know who they belong to. They are children of God, and their allegiance is not up for sale. That line, even if not, might be one of the hardest prayers that we might even have to pray. It's easy to say, I trust God, when things are working out well. It's much harder to say, I trust God, even if it's not working out the way I wanted it to. When the heat is on, when things break down, when the world seems frightening, this is when faith becomes real. Not the certainty that God will keep us out of the fire, but the confidence that God will be with us within the fire. And it's really the turning point of the story, the turning point in our lives too, the moment when our trust in God becomes deeper than our need for controlling the situation. And of course, Nebuchadnezzar doesn't like being told no. Authoritarians never do like being told no, so he gets particularly angry. Now, the NIV says that his face was distorted with rage. What a phrase, distorted with rage. And he orders the furnace to be heated up 7 times hotter and then meant to be thrown in. Remember, they probably didn't have a dial there, so the idea of the number 7 in the Old Testament usually means a lot. That's a lot, and a very lot is 40. They heated it up a lot, and they got thrown in. And even in his fury, he doesn't even notice that his own soldiers are dying. That's how dangerous anger and angry power can be. That they are so trying to drive their particular purpose, they're not realising that their own supporters are being hurt by this. Oh, this is too close to home, isn't it? I should stop being political at the front of church. But it is. Nebuchadnezzar is the picture of a fragile leader, a man whose ego is so brittle that any act of conscience feels like an attack on them. Like, it's easy to criticise political figures in the world, but maybe there's a lesson in us, for us in here too. When we are challenged, when our own power or pride is challenged, how do we respond? Do we respond like Nebuchadnezzar with control, trying to control the situation, make it happen the way that we want it to happen? Or with rage, do we get angry? Or do we respond like Jesus, who emptied himself and took upon the form of a servant? Yeah, it's easy to blame Nebuchadnezzar or other leaders. We see some of this in ourselves too. Anyway, back to the story. Because the miracle comes, as we saw in the kids' talk as well, they threw him in, and that wonderful question. Didn't we throw 3 people in there? Why can I see 4? Why can I see 4 people in the flames? A 4th presence shining with divine light. The ropes are gone, the men are free, and not even the smell of smoke is on them, which is the real miracle, because smoke gets everywhere. So let's address the question, who is the 4th man in this story? It depends who you ask. If you ask the Jewish people who, tell the story out of the Old Testament, they would say the 4th person is an angel. If you ask the Christian church who the 4th person is, we would say it is Jesus. This is Jesus who has come and enters into the furnace of human suffering. Really, it doesn't matter either way. The message is still the same, that if we are going through a difficult time, we're not alone. That God doesn't leave us alone. Faith gives us somebody in the fire with us. We like the idea that it's Jesus because it links beautifully in with our understanding of what's coming up soon. Jesus, our King, is not far away in a heavenly room, untouched by our pain, but we worship Jesus, a King who walks with us. As we begin to acknowledge in Advent next week, Jesus, Emmanuel, is the one who joined our humanity, who set aside his glory and came close. Jesus is not the King who commands us from above, but the King who stands beside. Which is why this reading is such a powerful reading on Christ the King Sunday. I was really quite excited when I saw these reading on this particular day. I thought it fitted really well. Because, as I've said before, it sort of puts up this comparison between Nebuchadnezzar, the king, and Jesus, the king. And the 2 kings could not be more different. Nebuchadnezzar's glory burns others, where Jesus' glory restores us. Nebuchadnezzar fire destroys, where Jesus' fire purifies and redeems. It's just a beautiful play-off of these 2 kings and how we are called to serve Jesus the King, not the kings of this age. So what does this story mean for us here right now? Just to sum this up, I'm going to give you 4 invitations that I think this reading gives us that you can consider. Firstly, I think that it invites us to give our allegiance, or our ultimate allegiance, where are we up to? Ultimate allegiance to Christ alone. There will always be other statues in this world that demands our attention, demands our allegiance. And we do have to serve some of these in some ways, but our ultimate allegiance is always to Christ. Christ calls us to worship him above all others. The second invitation is that we need to stand firm in our faith when the pressure comes. Like the 3 friends, we may face moments when following Jesus puts us at odds with the world or with the situation that we are finding in. Faithfulness sometimes demands a cost. Someone said that out there. Faithfulness demands a cost. But as they discovered, integrity burns less than compromise. The third invitation is that sometimes we need to trust that Christ is present in our lives, even when we may not be feeling that in that moment, that whatever furnace you face, whether it's grief, anxiety, illness, uncertainty, whatever, Jesus is there. Jesus makes that promise. I will be with you always. He may not take us out of the fire immediately, but Jesus is always with us. And lastly, let your faith become a witness, which is what Shadrack, Meshack and Abednego actually did. When they came out, the king acknowledged that this is a God who saves. Mind you, he never actually acknowledged that he will follow this God. He just sort of says, everybody else can't say bad stuff about this God, otherwise I'll punish them as well. But still, he does see the witness of Shadrack, Meshack and Abednego. Our quiet perseverance can speak louder than any sermon. When others see courage, grace and peace in us, they see Christ the King in us. Which would be a good spot to finish the sermon. But I think there's just a couple more points I have to add to this list, which is more relevant to us in in the world we find today. Because as I've said before, we live in a world that builds these gold statues and demands compliance through power and fear. And the challenge for us as followers of Jesus is to live differently, to refuse to go along with what the world is saying that we have to do, to walk with the one who has already walked with us. I think there's also an element of, if I can squeeze another one into the list. Oh, it's not even there. Where is it? I had number 6 on my PowerPoint last night, of solidarity. This story was written in exile. It was a story for people of exile. People far away from home, trying to stay faithful in a culture that didn't share their values. And the story reminds us that when God stands with the oppressed, with the refugee, with the minority voice, when others face the heat, maybe we're called to be the 4th person in the fire with them. That we're the ones who can stand with them and say, I know this is not our fire, but we're going to stand with you and support you as you go through your fire. Because that's what Christ-like kingship looks like. That's what Jesus does for us. Comes and stands with us. How do we do it for others? And so now we are at Advent. It starts next Sunday, the threshold of Advent. Next week we'll start lighting candles, the candles of hope and peace and joy and love. But Daniel 3 is preparing us for that. Before the Advent flame is lit, there's another fire burning. A fire that is tested, purified, and made courageous. Jesus the King is not a distant monarch. He is Emmanuel. God is with us. He walks with us in the furnace, and he walks with us into the future. And when you pass through the waters, he'll be there. When you walk through the fire, you won't be burned. For he has called you by name, and you are his. So on this Christ the King Sunday, let us declare again who our King really is. Our King is not a king of coercion, but a king of compassion. Not the ruler who burns others, but the Saviour who bears the heat himself. Not a king seated far away, but the King who walks right beside us. So let us worship Jesus, the King who walks with us. Amen.